For as long as I can remember, I've been captivated by the details in art. What started as a childhood passion gradually became my life's work. The transition from simple sketches to commissioned pieces was slow but steady. Before long, I was spending every moment working on new projects, honing my skills, and finding inspiration everywhere. The studio had witnessed countless creations, some more recognized than others, but each added to my growing career. As my reputation spread, I started receiving calls from unexpected clients, often referred by Melbourne's elite. Little did I know, this passion would soon pull me into events beyond my control. One day, I received a call with no caller ID. I was ready to hang up if it seemed like a scam. "Yes," I answered flatly. "Matthew Knox," a calm, deep voice responded. "Speaking. Are you in your studio? My employer wants to see your portfolio." "I'm here. Who is your employer?" The man ignored my question. "We'll be there in 30 minutes. Curiosity mixed with unease as I hung up. The mysterious tone stuck with me. Exactly 30 minutes later, a sleek blue Maserati arrived. The driver, about my age, hopped out, dressed in a sharp blue suit matching the car. He opened the door for an older man in charcoal attire. Both looked polished and confident. They knocked, but entered my studio before I could answer, glancing around at my art. The older man approached me, hand extended. Up close, he had an air of authority, a bit thicker around the waist, but still in his prime, likely in his 40s. "Joe, this is my chief of staff, Bruno, also my cousin and closest relative. Matthew." I gestured toward the table and chairs, but Joe ignored them and went straight to a painting I was working on. A detailed domestic scene on a plaster vase. Usually I painted directly on walls, but smaller pieces like this helped spread my name. "A fresco?" he asked. "Secco. Fresco is done on wet plaster. Secco is on dry. It won't last centuries, but it's what people want." "You paint on dry plaster walls?" "Yes." "Landscapes? Interiors? Still life? Nudes? All of those." I pulled out my portfolio and showed him some recent commissions. Bruno nodded at one. "Boss, that's the one I saw." It was a Garden of Eden scene with Adam and Eve, done in Renaissance style on a wall in a wealthy suburb. It wasn't groundbreaking, but this kind of work was trendy with Melbourne's new money crowd. I'd gotten a few jobs like this lately. It paid the bills. Joe didn't seem to know much about art, but I had checked his boxes, just as I was mentally filing him into one of mine. I have several rooms ready for detailed murals, classical with a touch of raunch, my study, bedroom, pool room. If it works out, there could be more. What's your daily rate? I'd been stiffed by wealthy clients before, so I named a rate and added, paid fortnightly, cash preferred. No need for the tax man to think I was more than a starving artist. Sensible, Joe said. We can work together. Come out tomorrow to take a look. Bring your sketchbooks. He gave me the address and left with Bruno driving. Joe didn't ask if I was free, had a contract, or finishing other work. He was used to getting his way. I arrived on time the next day. The house was a massive, faux Provençal mansion on a double-sized suburban lot. I had worked in smaller versions of these before, including where I had done the mural Bruno had seen. This one didn't look as ridiculous as some, thanks to the larger garden, but it still lacked any real charm. It wasn't Bruno who answered the door. For a moment I was frozen. A tall blonde woman greeted me with a faint smile, seemingly used to my reaction. Her long hair was styled in a French braid, and she wore an elegant apple-red day dress, matching her lipstick and nails. The modest neckline revealed flawless pale skin, and her eyebrows matched her hair color. She exuded a natural, classic beauty and confidence, a stark contrast to the house. She appeared a couple of years younger than me. "You must be Matthew," she said warmly. "I'm Catherine, Joe's wife." Her voice was polished, the kind of refined Australian private school accent that hit its rougher edges when needed. I regained my composure and smiled. "Yes, Matthew." "Nice to meet you, Catherine." "Come through," she said, leading me through the house. We stopped in a large room with a newly installed snooker table and a blank plaster wall ready for my work. I had worried pool room might mean a swimming pool, but this was fine. Australians tend to refer to any game room as a pool room, whether it's for pool, billiards, or snooker. "Next is the bedroom," she said, her tone suddenly sharper, though her face remained neutral. The master bedroom had one blank wall, broken by a door likely leading to the walk-in closet and ensuite. A large window on the opposite side provided a view of a small garden crowded with fruit trees. "And Joe's in his study," she added, her voice relaxing slightly, but still with an undercurrent of tension. She knocked on the study door and gave me a small smile. Joe usually only lets business associates into the study. I'm not allowed in. You're lucky. Her smile stayed, but her eyes turned cold, as if testing my ability to read between the lines. I hoped I'd pass her unspoken test. I gave her a curious look, but Joe cut off any further conversation by throwing open the study door. "Matthew, good," he said, leading me in. He left the door open for Catherine to hear, but didn't invite her inside, and she stayed in the doorway. The study was large, divided into two sections. The front had a small meeting area with plush green leather chairs around a polished table. At the back was a large wooden desk, mostly bare except for a green banker's lamp and an expensive monitor. A heavy safe was built into the wall across from the desk. Another wall, bare and unadorned, was at the far end instead of a window. "You'll start here," Joe said. "This is a secure room, but it's dull. I want you to paint a window with a nice outdoor view, like the Garden of Eden scene, just no nudes. We'll work around each other, but sometimes I'll ask you to leave. You'll have plenty of time." "I can do that," I replied. "In the pool room, paint us playing snooker. You'll meet my associates, so make sure it looks like we're having fun, and make sure I'm winning. I usually do." He let out a short laugh. "As for the bedroom," Joe added, "we have a plan for that. You can do it after the study." He winked at Catherine, who gave a faint smile, though her eyes stayed cold. I paused. "I'll take measurements now, and if you could show me around the outside, I'll sketch a view for the window and bring you a proposal." He waved me off. "Go ahead, and Catherine will show you around. No need to show me the sketches. I trust you. But if I don't like it, I might liquidate you." He laughed, but there was a hint of seriousness in his eyes. I knew I needed to tread carefully with him. After taking measurements, I left Joe in the study and went with Catherine. As we headed toward the garden, she sighed in frustration, then gave me an apologetic look. "Forgive me," she said. "You're here for a job, not to witness our little issues." I smiled. "It's not my business. I work in people's homes all the time. None of us have perfect relationships." "Are you in a relationship, Matthew?" "No." "Sounds perfect to me," she said with a light laugh. We walked to the edge of the garden and around the perimeter, while I scouted angles for a fantasy landscape to paint in Joe's study. I could easily reimagine the view without the neighboring houses. I tried to build some trust with Catherine as we walked. "Have you lived here long?" "No, we just moved in. Joe had a pricey townhouse in the inner north, but now that business is good, he wanted us to find our place." She smirked. "I grew up in a similar house in Sydney, but it was older, with a beautiful garden and friendly neighbors. You can't buy your way into a community." As we talked, I sketched the garden, stretching the conversation. Catherine's guard came down quickly. She clearly needed someone to talk to. She told me she met Joe on a European vacation and married him young, giving up her career to move to Melbourne. He was about 10 years older, which caused tension with her family. "I know I'm oversharing," she said, "but I was stubborn, cut ties with family and friends when they were just giving me good advice. I made my bed and I'll lie in it." Before we went back inside, she stopped me. "Two things you need to know. First, don't cross Bruno or Joe. Bruno and I barely tolerate each other. He's obsessed with me, and I displaced him in the inheritance order. He'll turn on you if he wants to, and Joe won't stop him. Both will crush you if they feel like it." "Got it. And the second?" Catherine stiffened. "Joe is requiring me to model nude for the bedroom painting, some sort of Zexy Eve thing. He and Bruno came up with the idea after seeing your work." I was startled. "I'm sorry. I've never worked with a model under pressure. We can't do that." Her voice sharpened. "I just told you how dangerous they are. I'll do the pose. Joe wants to assert his ownership of me, and he'll show off the painting to his inner circle, and probably even to his mistress. Be careful what you say or how you'll look at me in front of him." Now I was genuinely shaken. What had I gotten myself into? Catherine wasn't a helpless victim, but she was clearly choosing to endure her controlling relationship rather than confront Joe. Any mistakes I made could bring consequences for both of us. This commission had quickly taken a dark turn. I turned to her, choosing my words carefully. "Catherine, thank you for sharing. I'm sorry for your situation. If I paint you, nude or not, I will honor you, no matter how others behave. If there's something I can do to help without making things worse, tell me. And if you want me to turn down the job, let me know." She relaxed a little and smiled. "Don't back out. He'll just find someone else, and I'd have to go through this all over again. I'd rather not be known as the crazy woman from Q. But thank you for offering." We walked back inside, and I asked her to show me other window views so I could sketch perspectives for the study. Then I headed home, with plenty to think about. I spent a few days in my studio working on the sketches, then returned the next week with my tools to begin in the study. Joe had moved his desk, but still worked at the conference table while I prepped the wall. The detailed garden scene would take several days. I have a method for working around clients. I wear headphones, not to listen to music, but to discourage conversation. Once they think I'm not listening, they act naturally, which helps me get a feel for the place. Joe did ask me to leave a few times, but mostly left me alone. When Bruno or others came for meetings, they were initially uneasy with me there, but Joe told them to treat me like part of the furniture. After checking on my progress, they would get back to business, which appeared to involve illegal tobacco, vaping, extortion, and protection rackets. Nothing surprising. I didn't approve, but I'd seen it all before while doing similar jobs. Their conversations were full of bravado, though no one dared push things too far with Joe or Bruno. One conversation stood out when Bruno asked Joe if there were updates on that certain matter. Joe quickly cut him off with a "not now" and took Bruno out of the room to talk. This made me pause. They hadn't been shy about discussing other crimes in front of me, so what made this so sensitive? I filed it away along with Catherine's warnings. There was also something that amused me, though I couldn't use it without risk. Joe frequently accessed the large safe in the room when others weren't around. He seemed to store cash, jewelry, and important documents there. Since my back was turned and I acted oblivious, he didn't make me leave the room when he entered the key code. He had a habit of muttering the numbers to himself, and by the end of the week, I had memorized the code. Catherine appeared most days. I brought my lunch and ate in the garden, and she often joined me, clearly bored. I learned she had a business degree from Sydney University. "I was naive," she said quietly. "I thought I was marrying into a glamorous family and could help Joe grow his business. But he's shut me out. My job is to be decorative and have children, though we have none because Joe's infertile. He won't admit it, but I've been tested. So I'm wasting my youth to make a minor crime boss look good while dealing with creepy Bruno, who leers at me and tries to worm his way into Joe's business and life." "What do you do with your time?" I asked. "I socialize with the other wives. They talk a lot about their husband's business, so I've learned more than they realize. Joe occasionally takes me overseas, but he controls my passport and money. I host events, look attractive, and act gracious. On Fridays, Bruno drives Joe to his mistress up north and brings him back the next day or Sunday. I stay here, trying not to seethe, dreaming of escaping and starting over." She paused, then added, "But I've done nothing. I can't even have an affair. I'd be dead in a week. So it's just me and my thoughts." I held back a laugh, knowing this conversation was heading into dangerous territory. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "Thank you for trusting me. It doesn't sound like it's even safe to offer you my help." She laughed and shot back, "I bet you know your way around better than some, and I'm sure you don't fire blanks either." I smiled, then stood up to head back inside to work. By the following Tuesday, the mural in the study was finished. It depicted an Australian Eden, with a view through a window that transitioned from a suburban garden to the Australian bush. Cockatoos perched on nearby trees, and distant specks suggested eagles near the mountains. I was proud of it, and Joe was too. He called Bruno in to praise him for finding me, and even invited Catherine to take a look. She offered polite compliments, though I could tell she wasn't thrilled about the next project. After some back-patting, Joe got down to business. "Bruno, give Matthew a week's bonus. We take care of our people. Matthew, take tomorrow off and come back Thursday to discuss the next mural." I packed up and headed home, thinking about how to approach the next challenge. Since Joe didn't know Catherine had warned me, I would need to manage my reactions carefully while offering a plan that could preserve her dignity. The next day, I visited the National Gallery, reflecting on how models and artists work together. I was comfortable with nude modeling, but this was different. Catherine resented the situation. I considered quitting, even though Joe was paying well. I doubted Joe would resort to violence, but he might retaliate against Catherine if he suspected she had spoken to me. And being the type to defend his authority, Joe would likely escalate if I openly challenged him. Thursday arrived, and I showed up at the house as expected, still conflicted. Bruno, grinning and energized, greeted me at the door. He led me straight to the master bedroom, where Joe and Catherine had clearly been in conversation. The atmosphere was tense. Joe, dressed in his usual charcoal suit, stood by while Catherine wore a robe. Joe put on a big smile, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Matthew," he said, We're going to have a bedroom scene on the wall. Clever, right? And to make it more exciting, Catherine has volunteered to be your model. She'll be nude on the bed as our innocent Eve. To keep it respectable, Bruno and I will take turns supervising while you do your sketches and painting. That was Bruno's angle. I tried to stay composed, but I glanced at Catherine. Her eyes widened in shock at the mention of Bruno. Clearly, Joe had sprung this on her, expecting her to handle it gracefully in front of me. She was visibly shaken, biting her lip. Joe was humiliating her in front of Bruno, who had obviously known the plan. Bruno's ambitions were falling into place. What was I supposed to do? The safe move would be to play along and accept the cruelty. If I protested, Joe might escalate and Bruno would hate me, making things worse for Catherine. But I had reached my limit. I had to confront this, just indirectly. I turned to Joe, smiling. What an interesting idea. But I won't need your wife to be nude for the initial sketches. That can come later if she's comfortable. I added, Boss, could we have a quick chat in your study about a technical detail? I walked out, hoping he'd follow. Surprisingly, he did. Once in the study, he was clearly annoyed, but kept his composure, arms crossed and stony-faced. I seized the moment. Joe, you hired me as an artist, not a marriage counselor. I can't fix your relationship, but as an artist, I can tell you I won't get a good pose from Catherine with her husband watching, and certainly not with Bruno leering. If she's uncomfortable, the painting won't be worth doing. Unless Catherine specifically asks for you to be present, I suggest you let me work with her directly, in whatever pose she's comfortable with, nude or not. I'll respect that she's your wife, but you need to let me do my job. He stared at me and I braced for an outburst. But after a moment he smiled and forced out one of his short laughs. You've got guts. No one questions my judgment or my marriage and stays in my employ, or alive, he added thoughtfully. I held his gaze. Fair enough, he said. I'll trust your artist's judgment. He gave a sarcastic bow. But that painting better be damn good. I nodded and turned to leave. Tell Bruno to come here, he said. Ouch. I returned to the bedroom and passed the message to an on-edge Bruno. I knew I hadn't made a friend by blocking his power move. I quietly told Catherine about my conversation with Joe. I hope I didn't make things worse. No, that's good. Thank you. I was about to break. Posing in front of that leering creep would have destroyed me, she said. But if I refused, Joe would have hit me. I winced. Let's talk about ideas for the painting, I said. We can't do the same trick as the study with the real window here, but maybe we could show two worlds. One through the real window, and one in a fantasy scene, with the model choosing between them. That works, Catherine said. And if I'm nude, I won't just be lying there waiting for a man. I'll be deciding on my own terms. Instead of rushing back to the studio, I stayed to discuss more options with her. We'd need to run the idea by Joe, but I wanted to ensure Catherine had input. It was still a terrible situation, being objectified in her own home, but the more control she had, the more she warmed to the idea of making a statement through the painting. Of course, Joe wouldn't catch all the subtle messages, so we had to balance it with his expectations of an erotic scene. By mid-afternoon, I had stayed much longer than planned, so I decided to check in with Joe. I knocked on the study door and he let me in. He was alone. I jumped right in. Joe, I was out of line earlier, and I apologize. I've been discussing the painting with Catherine, and we have some good ideas that she's on board with. I'll start sketching them. He looked at me and said, Sit down, Matthew. We both sat, and he seemed more reserved than usual. I've been thinking about what you said, he began. Yeah, you were rude, and it's not your place to criticize my marriage. But you made me think. Mentioning Bruno shook me. You were right, there's an issue there. When I told him he was off, nude wife watching duty, he nearly lost it. At his boss, I sent him home to cool off, and I'll make some changes around here. I nodded. I doubted Bruno would back down, but this might be a test of Joe's commitment to respecting his wife. I left, feeling like I might live another day or two. Over the next few days, I worked on sketches and eventually came up with a final idea to show Catherine and Joe. When I arrived, they greeted me together. Bruno wasn't around, but that didn't mean much. I spread the sketches on the bed, and Catherine approved immediately. After some hesitation, Joe agreed too, then gave me a formal nod and left the room. When do you need me to pose? Catherine asked. And how should I prepare? In a few days, I said. I'll set up the structure first, then I'll need you for a few sittings. I'll help make sure your hair looks like you've just woken up. No makeup, but you can keep the apple red nails. I paused, then continued. I'd also prefer if you weren't too trimmed down below. But if it's too late, we'll make it work." She laughed. "Glad you told me. I'll cancel my appointment. No problem." As I started preparations, she stayed to watch. Quietly, she said, "Bruno's been kept busy with other jobs, and Joe didn't visit his mistress last weekend. Instead, he took me to dinner and a musical. Seems like he's realizing he needs to pay more attention to me. Thank you for your help." I nodded and continued working, with nothing more to add. By the start of the next week, I was ready for Catherine to pose. Joe was in his study, but Bruno was absent again. Catherine, in her robe with her hair in a loose knot, untied it and lay down on the pillow, wriggling a bit to muss up her hair. Once I was satisfied with the look, it was time for the big moment. "Take your robe off when you're ready," I said, turning my back. "Done," she replied almost instantly. I turned around to see her sitting on the bed, and she was stunning, just as expected. Though in her early 30s, she had the body of a fit 25-year-old, muscular, beautifully proportioned, and her pale skin was flawless. I wanted the painting to show her as a strong, mature woman, not a naive girl, capturing her rediscovery of power and joy. "Catherine, you look magnificent. If this painting doesn't work, that's on me," I said. She laughed. I walked over. "May I adjust your arms and legs for the pose? Stop me if you're uncomfortable." "That's fine." She was fully committed to bringing our vision to life. It took some time, but I positioned her in a dynamic pose, halfway through springing from the bed, eyes toward the fantasy garden next to her, with an expression of joy. One foot on the floor, the other on the bed, her legs slightly spread, though the angle wasn't fully explicit. It would be a tough pose to hold, but we aimed for a confident, active look. We got to work. I quickly updated my sketches, having done the initial ones without her nude. Once finished, I released her for the day while I planned the wall painting. It took a while, and when I finally let her go, she stretched in front of the window with a groan. Even from behind, her perfectly toned back and legs were just as impressive. Noticing my gaze, she turned to face me and started doing star jumps, bursting into laughter when she saw my wide-eyed reaction. "Sorry, Matthew, I couldn't resist. I feel like I'm 20 again doing this with you." "You won't hear me complaining," I said, adjusting my pants. "But you might want to get dressed before I do something I regret." Smirking, she went into the walk-in closet, returned with clothes, and slowly dressed in front of me. Black underwear, a navy dress, and matching sandals. The reverse dance didn't help settle my reaction, and I sighed with relief when she finished and grabbed her handbag. "I'm off to lunch with the wives and girlfriends. Wish me luck. Should I tell them what I was doing this morning?" "Definitely not," I replied. She waved and left. The first session had gone well, but it took me a moment to compose myself. Soon after, Joe popped his head in, trying not to appear too nosy. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing at my sketches. "Actually, it was great. Thanks for letting me approach it my way. Your wife is a pleasure to work with, and I think it'll turn out well." He nodded stiffly and left. Catherine gave me 4 more sessions over the next few days. I worked on getting her properly on the wall, focusing on her skin tones and capturing her eyes and expression. Everything came together smoothly, as if my brushes were made to paint her. Her mood, once negative, had completely shifted, and by Friday she even mentioned being more attentive to Joe at night. They were sleeping in the spare room while I worked. By the end of the following week, the mural was finished. I invited them in for the reveal. The painting exceeded my expectations. The fantasy garden through the painted window featured an apple orchard, amplifying the real one outside, with ripe apples symbolizing a more mature Garden of Eden. Catherine, as an adult Eve, wasn't heading toward a serpent, but toward life's pleasures, ready to enjoy more apples. She looked stunning, and I was proud of the work. Joe was thrilled and clapped me on the back. "You've earned another bonus and a couple of weeks off. I've got business to handle, so it's not convenient to have you here. When you return, you can start on the pool room mural." Things went downhill after that. Near the end of my break, I got a text from an unknown number. "Be careful when you come back. Business problems. Mood is soured. B is back and fighting with J. Watch yourself." C double quote, my heart sank. I had hoped the last phase of the project would be smooth, especially after navigating the issues with the bedroom mural. Was it worth going back? I had a common problem. I lived job to job. This commission had been lucrative, but I'd needed success to secure future work. So, the next Monday, I showed up as planned. To my surprise, Bruno let me in. Expecting hostility, I was caught off guard when he greeted me warmly. "Matthew, come in." He led me to the pool room, closed the door, and smirked. I saw your work in the bedroom, and I love it. New beginnings, huh? Especially with Joe out of the picture. Uh-oh. Bruno was clearly reading into the painting and plotting something. I didn't want to get involved in any plan he had to replace Joe in the house, marriage, or business. As Joe's closest relative, Bruno likely saw a path to power if he could seduce or remove Catherine. His tactic seemed to be sowing discord while presenting himself as an alternative. He didn't seem to realize Catherine hated him, and I worried things might become more dangerous for her once he figured that out. His obsession with her was obvious, but it wouldn't necessarily protect her. I shifted the conversation. Bruno, tell me about the games played on this table. Surprised, he went along. You don't know snooker? I play badly, but I want to get a feel for the room's atmosphere. He gestured to the racks of balls and cues on the wall. 15 red balls, 6 colors, and the cue ball. Reds are worth 1. Colors are worth yellow 2, green 3, brown 4, blue 5, pink 6, black 7. You sink them in the right order, avoid fouls, and that's the game. We usually play for money or forfeits to keep it interesting. Joe steps in if things get too rowdy. Forfeits, usually business-related. Who's doing the next dirty job, that kind of thing. Best if I don't say more. Joe doesn't allow women here except Catherine, and she doesn't play. I nodded, understanding enough. Thanks, Bruno. I'll start sketching. This wall's big, so it'll take a while. I spent the whole day there, setting up the snooker balls, refreshing myself on the rules, and playing a mock game. I studied the angles, fascinated by how ball placement changed the geometry and storytelling possibilities. If you know the code, the possibilities are endless, I mused. I overheard Bruno and Joe talking and occasionally arguing in the study, but I didn't see Catherine until mid-afternoon. She smiled as she walked in, though her mood seemed a bit subdued. Hi, Matthew. Sorry I didn't stop by earlier. I've been socializing all day, gathering business intelligence, though it's not my favorite thing. What do you do with that info? I asked. Nothing for now. They don't realize I could run things better. Maybe one day. She looked at the table, playing with ideas, combinations, and possibilities, as sharp as ever. Let's play a game, she suggested. I need some practice. I was great at it in university. She didn't need practice to beat me, winning 3 frames in a row. By the third game, though, with her coaching, I started to grasp the rhythm and tactics, which gave me more ideas for the painting. Bruno told me they usually play for money or forfeits, I said. She frowned at the mention of his name and closed the door. I don't know how he's back in the house, but Joe needs him for the business. Meanwhile, he's back to leering and making suggestive comments. I know he's seen the bedroom mural. He probably goes home to enjoy a photo of it, she continued. Money and forfeits? Yes, though it's not much money, and you don't want to know about the forfeits. Mostly petty crime, but sometimes other things, which they try to hide from me. At least they don't involve me. Bruno's not the only one making suggestive remarks. It's all part of their constant jockeying for position. Joe's still the best male snooker player here, but Bruno's catching up. I smiled at her casual mention of male snooker players, knowing she could likely beat them all. An idea for the mural started forming in my mind, but I kept it to myself for now. I shifted the conversation to a more serious topic. Thanks for the message. I'm more worried about you than me. Let me know if you need help. She was about to brush it off, but paused, looked at me, and nodded. Actually, Matthew, if you could do most of your sketching here instead of at your studio, it would be comforting. She hesitated before choosing the word, clearly thinking ahead about the week. She smiled and left the room, and I returned to my sketches until it was time to leave. I didn't see Joe, but I could hear him and Bruno talking in the study as I headed out. The week passed slowly but steadily. By Wednesday, I had developed 2 concepts for the mural and began sketching them out. Joe checked in a few times, and I showed him the one I had made the most progress on. I kept my alternative idea to myself as it was still in the early stages. Joe seemed satisfied with the main concept, gave me a pat on the back, and left me to it. The tension between him and Bruno seemed to ease as I overheard fewer arguments. One day, while passing the study, I overheard Bruno saying, "So boss, I've been holding off Auntie Pink like you asked, but she's getting antsy. Want to make your Friday night last all weekend since you've been here the past few? I'm sure she's missing you, or at least what you're packing." Joe barked his sharp laugh. Sure, set it up. I was torn. Telling Catherine would mean meddling in their family affairs, but hiding it didn't feel right either, given my promise to help her. I decided to take a different approach and challenged her to a game of snooker with a side bet. Whoever wins gets to ask the other for some interesting information. She wasn't fooled. She knew she could have gotten the information out of me anyway. But we played the game, door closed, and after she beat me as usual, she said, "Spit it out." I overheard Bruno convincing Joe to spend the whole weekend with his mistress. Anger flashed in her eyes before she looked thoughtful. I wonder if Bruno's got a side deal with her. Joe has him paying her bills, covering the house and car lease. It'd be a disaster for her if Joe dropped her. She's just as guilty as anyone in this mess. Have you ever met her? She laughed bitterly. I'm not supposed to know she exists. Officially, Joe visits his poor old aunt in the country who's too nervous for visitors. Unofficially, I know where she lives, what she drives, and that Joe probably keeps her house's title in the safe. She's about 10 years older than me, thin, with bright pink hair. God knows what Joe sees in her. I wouldn't give her a second glance. Maybe she's good in bed? I teased. I guarantee she's not better than me. Maybe she's just better at flattery. By Friday, Joe and Bruno were close again, with laughter coming from the study. Joe was all smiles when I saw him, clearly having worked through their business issues. Bruno was back in control, and Joe's renewed focus on his marriage seemed over. Catherine was tense, but tried to hide it around others. I was now working directly on the pool room wall, still deciding between two designs, though the key elements were the same. Catherine, noticing my two variations, examined the second one closely. It showed a shot in the final sequence of a frame, where only the colored balls remained. That shot would be a foul, she said, raising an eyebrow. I met her gaze. Yes, if the rules still applied. When would the rules not She stared at me, realizing. I keep underestimating you, Matthew, so do they. But I learn. She thought for a moment, then spoke decisively. I want you to leave at your usual time today. Wait nearby for my text, then come back through the side door. Park on another street. Can you do that? I nodded. I waited nervously at a nearby bar, having changed into regular clothes. I knew Catherine wasn't inviting me back for anything romantic, but to be there while she handled whatever was unfolding. I wasn't sure of her exact plan, but I knew she'd considered different outcomes and wanted me for backup, given I already knew some of her secrets. Knowing them was risky, but I'd already chosen my side. It didn't take long. Her text read, as discussed. I headed back to the house. She was fuming when she let me in. I should be used to it, but I hate them, she said. 3 weeks ago, I thought Joe and I were getting back on track. Tonight, he tells me, Bruno's taking me to visit Auntie. See you Sunday. As if I'd still buy that. How long is the trip? I asked. About an hour and a half each way. After a moment, I recited a string of numbers. What's that? She asked, confused. If I'm right and he hasn't changed it, that's Joe's safe code. She stared at me, then burst out laughing. Let's try it. We moved to the study. Joe had packed away his papers, leaving the door unlocked, trusting the safe. I punched in the code, hit open, and the safe unlocked. Inside were 2 shelves. The bottom held jewelry boxes, gold bars, and stacks of cash. Joe had more money than I'd thought, likely the business's working capital. The top shelf had documents, passports, notebooks, and folders, probably property deeds and other important papers. On the far right was a small black case. I glanced at Catherine for approval, then pulled it out and handed it to her. Inside was a hand tool and ammunition. She grimaced and handed it back for me to return. Catherine's eyes gleamed. Matthew, this changes everything in our favor. She suddenly hugged me tightly and kissed me on the lips. We stayed there for a minute, swaying, and I have to admit I enjoyed the unexpected kiss. Hour, I thought. Hour? I could get used to it, though I might not survive the night. Catherine pulled away and got serious. We probably have at least 2 hours. Bruno might stay gone all weekend, but I bet he plans to come back and try to seduce me while Joe's away. I nodded. Bruno was dumb enough to believe he still had a chance. Catherine grabbed silk gloves from her room and put me in charge of the camera. We photographed everything in the safe. Cash, house deeds, including for Joe's mistress's home, passports, and Joe's will. The notebooks were filled with business details that didn't mean much to me, but Catherine seemed confident she could make sense of them. We avoided the Colt except to wipe the case clean, and I taught her the safe code until she had it memorized. We finished with 30 minutes to spare. Come into the spare bedroom, she whispered. Inside, she kissed me again, and we held each other while she thought. Okay, she said as we pulled apart. It's risky from here. We'll leave the Colt. Violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. But grab a kitchen knife just in case. I'll stay out here, doing angry wife left at home things like watching murder shows and fantasizing about Joe. If I scream, come out and help if you can. But if things go wrong, know it's on me. If I survive, I'll put flowers on your grave. I chuckled grimly. Let's avoid that outcome. We prepared ourselves. From the spare bedroom, I could hear most of what happened in the house. If I had to intervene, it would have to be by surprise. Bruno was likely armed. I wasn't thrilled about this and felt tense, but I was ready. A little after 9 p.m., I heard the front door open. I doubted Catherine had ever agreed to Bruno having his own key. "Catherine!" Bruno called, and I heard a staged shriek from the lounge as she pretended to be shocked. She met him in the hall. "Bruno, what's going on? Has Joseanne had an emergency?" Her tone was overly dramatic. "No," Bruno replied. "Catherine, I need to tell you something." "Come sit in the dining room and tell me," she said, leading him to a spot near my hiding place where the formal chairs would make seduction difficult. Once seated, Bruno began, "Catherine, Joe isn't visiting his aunt. He's been with a mistress this whole time. He's with her now for the weekend. I'm sorry. I've known for a while, and it's been eating at me. You deserve so much better." He had clearly rehearsed this, but hadn't thought it through. "You knew?" Catherine replied, her voice turning cold. "My husband's been screwing a country hoe, and you knew? What, now you're going to help me get revenge by seducing me?" I grinned in the dark. She'd nailed his exact plan. "No," Bruno stammered. "I mean, yes, I do love you, always have, but I wasn't planning that. I'll do anything to help you." He clearly expected Catherine to fall into his arms. "I should hope not," Catherine said. "Because whatever Joe is doing, he's still my husband. I won't betray him, no matter what he and his mistress deserve. But thank you, Bruno, for your offer." Silence. I imagined her staring him down, waiting for the truth to sink in. It finally did. "Catherine, surely you don't mean—" "Bruno, do as you please when you leave, but I have nothing more to say to a man with no courage." Another pause, then I heard Bruno rise. His voice was subdued. "I need to go for a drive. I'll have more news later." Catherine thanked him softly, and I listened as he left and sped away. Catherine came into the spare bedroom and hugged me, sobbing and trembling. I held her in silence. After a moment, she checked her watch. "Joe always turns his phone off with her, but I should call." She dialed, and when she got his voicemail, left a worried message. "Joe, I'm so sorry to call. I know you don't want to be disturbed, but Bruno was here. I thought he was with you, but he made a pass at me. I convinced him to leave, but he seemed angry. Please be careful. Call me. I love you." Checking her watch again, she said, "Come to the TV room, Matthew. Let's watch something mindless." We watched a detective show, but it was hard to focus. After half an hour, Catherine got up, turned it off, and made another call to Joe, leaving another message. Then she called the police, her voice tense. "I think my husband's in danger. His cousin may be coming after him with a Colt." She gave them Joe's location, then hung up, crying, after getting a promise they'd update her. We waited. After a while, Catherine said, "Matthew, I think it's best if you go home. We might not hear anything until morning, and it'd be hard to explain your presence. Thank you so much, but don't contact me unless it's urgent." I was worried, but agreed. She hugged me, and I left, though I couldn't sleep. She was taking a huge risk, and the news in the morning might not be good. The news the next morning was all over the radio and TV. A man had been shot by police after allegedly committing a double murder at a rural property. Reports said the police had received a tip from the wife of one of the victims, who was related to the alleged butcher. The victims included an adult woman and a man known to police, with possible links to organized crime. Names were not yet released. I left Catherine alone as she asked, but I was a mess. Her behavior the night before had been a mix of conspiracy, need, and affection, heightened by the gravity of the situation. I expected she would eventually distance herself from me, as long as she was sure of my silence. I wasn't naive enough to think she had fallen for me, and I knew she'd likely grieve for Joe despite everything. It's possible to feel both anger and sorrow at once. She definitely wouldn't be mourning Bruno or Joe's mistress, though. Saturday, I stayed low-key. I cleaned my studio, got coffee, and followed the unfolding news. By Sunday, they named the female victim, but not Joe or Bruno. The media was buzzing about a possible love triangle with speculation about Joe's mistress. Clearly, the police were leaking, likely having seen Joe's phone messages by now. By Monday, I wasn't sure what to do since Joe and Bruno's names weren't public. Then I got an anonymous text, "Come as normal. Be surprised if needed." It was risky, but made sense. When I arrived, police cars were parked out front, though there was no media yet. I figured it wouldn't take long for people to connect the dots. I went to the door as usual, but it wasn't Catherine who answered. It was an older woman, around 60, blonde with natural gray streaks, looking sharp and composed. "You must be Matthew," she said warmly. "My daughter has told me about you. You're part of her small circle of trust. I'm Barbara. I came down from Sydney yesterday." "Pleased to meet you, Barbara," I said, though I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. She gave a quiet, scornful laugh. "I'm not sorry." Then glancing over her shoulder, she whispered, "Not here." "Wait." She returned to the dining room where Catherine and the police were talking, calling out, "Coffees?" and took everyone's orders. Then, turning back to me with a smile, she said, "Take me to a coffee shop in your little van. Only barista coffee will do for the officers here." "Welcome to Melbourne, Barbara. I know a few good spots nearby." Once we were driving, she opened up. "Those two were toxic, and I'm glad they're gone. The police don't seem too upset either, though they'll investigate, especially since there's a woman involved. I don't want the details, but if you had a hand in getting rid of them, you're in my good graces. I'll even forgive you for painting my daughter undressed on that bedroom wall." I was relieved and amused. Good thing. I hadn't considered her mother seeing the painting. I thought the husband and cousin were the extent of my trouble. For the record, neither Catherine nor I had anything to do with the 3 deaths. "I'd be disappointed if you had," she replied. I raised her with more class than that. We ordered coffee, and while waiting, Barbara asked me about myself. It seemed Catherine had spoken well of me. Barbara explained that after their long estrangement, Catherine called her down from Sydney and told her that she trusted only Barbara and me. The issue with involving me further was that I had no plausible reason to be by her side without raising suspicion, while it was natural for her to call her mother. On the way back, Barbara tested me on the details, preparing me in case the police questioned me. She suggested I stay home for the week, since it wasn't the right time to continue my work. Barbara would find a way to tell me if Catherine mentioned I'd been with her during Bruno's visit. I dropped her off with the coffees and left. Back at my studio, I couldn't focus. The news didn't help. Bruno and Joe had been named, and the media were swarming Catherine's house. She'd hired a communications manager to handle them, who kept asking the press to leave and stuck to a prepared statement. Was I in danger from Catherine? Barbara said she trusted me, but could I trust her? Did I understand her well enough? By Tuesday, I turned to my usual way of processing, painting. I started a portrait of Catherine, working furiously all day and into the night, taking only quick breaks. By early morning, I was spent. I cleaned up and collapsed into bed, unsure if I had finished or gained any clarity. I decided to review it after some sleep. I awoke to a loud knock. Sunlight streamed through the windows. I had overslept. "Hold on," I called, throwing on a shirt and running my hands through my hair. A second knock came just as I reached the door, assuming it was the police. It wasn't the police. It was Catherine and Barbara, waiting patiently with 3 coffees and some muffins from the same place I had taken Barbara before. They were both smiling. I was surprised but managed to gesture for them to come in and offered them seats at my small table. I quickly grabbed a cloth from the kitchenette to wipe it down. They hadn't moved from the door, still holding their coffees and staring at the canvas I'd worked on the night before. "Oh," I said, embarrassed. "It's a work in progress, Catherine. Sorry I didn't ask. I'm not sure if it's any good." "Are you kidding me?" Catherine exclaimed. Barbara, still examining the painting, said calmly, "Language, Catherine." "Matthew, don't worry. It's good. Very good." I walked over, gently took the coffees and muffins from their hands, and placed them on the table before joining them to look at the painting. In daylight, I agreed with Barbara. The mural was impressive. A head-and-shoulders portrait of Catherine painted with bold strokes. Unlike my mural showing her joyfully looking out the window, this painting captured her in motion. Her fierce expression, focused blue eyes, and slightly open red lips suggested she was breathing hard. Her flushed cheeks and flowing blonde hair indicated she was racing with confidence. Though painted from memory, I realized I had truly captured her essence. We stood in silence until Barbara broke it. "Matthew, may I buy this? Even though it doesn't feature my daughter undressed like your other piece, I'd still love to hang it at home." "If you like it, Barbara, it's a gift," I replied. She firmly took my hand and said, "Thank you, but I'll give you something for it." Catherine then kissed me on the cheek without saying a word. We sat down and I took a sip of coffee. "Sorry for showing up like this, Matthew," Catherine said. "I was going crazy at home. We slipped out while the media was gone and the police had left. "How's it going with the police?" I asked.
Okay, I think. They're still investigating, and it will be a few days before they release the bodies for burial. They believe Bruno eliminated Joe out of jealousy and then the mistress because she witnessed it.
The tactical response team arrived just as it happened. I nodded. "Do you think they'll want to talk to me?" "I doubt it. I haven't mentioned you, but I need to figure out how to deal with the organized crime squad. They've held off because I'm a grieving widow, but they'll likely use this to probe the business. I'm clearing out most of the safe since it's too risky to leave anything here if they come with a search warrant. My mom is driving one of the cars up to Sydney tomorrow to help move things that can't go through airport security. She'll return for Joe's funeral." "What about Bruno and Joe's mistress?" "I don't know, and I don't care," she replied fiercely. "For the business, I think the best move is to turn it into something respectable, like an event security company. I'll keep those willing to take a pay cut and become honest, and I'll let go of the rest. If I can't change their ways, at least I can stop enabling them." After some more conversation, we agreed that I would return the following week to finish the mural in the pool room. Despite everything, Catherine wanted it completed and insisted on using the alternative design I had shown her, even when I raised an eyebrow at the risk. I worked on the mural all week while events unfolded around me. Catherine was busy managing business issues, interviewing Joe's team, consulting lawyers about Joe's estate, and organizing his funeral for early the following week. She asked me to stay away from the funeral, even though she would probably appreciate my presence. She and her mother, who flew back from Sydney, attended and held a subdued wake for the family. Bruno was not mentioned, but Catherine acknowledged Joe's mistress by referring to the other life unfairly cut short during the service. Though she felt conflicted, she wanted to ensure the mistress had some dignity in death and sent an anonymous donation for her funeral costs. I only learned the woman's name from the newspapers. Actually, her name was Laura. She had a loving family and did what she could to get by. I had chosen my side and understood Catherine's rage, but I acknowledged Laura. The week after the funeral, I was done. Barbara had gone home and I packed up my gear. Catherine was cordial and open, but very busy, so I kept my distance unless she wanted to talk. On a whim, I left one thing behind. There was a rack of snooker cues on the wall with a shelf for chalk and a wooden triangle. After signing my name on the mural, I cleaned my brush and propped it carefully next to the triangle. I went to the study to say goodbye, assuming it would be the last time. Catherine was on the phone, but signaled for me to wait. I wandered over to my mural, reflecting on everything that had happened since Joe and Bruno showed up at my door. This commission had been unique, and I doubted I'd ever take on another job where my employers were liquidated. Still, I was proud of my work. When Catherine finished her call, she came over, put her hands on my shoulders, and looked into my eyes. "Matthew, there's so much I want to talk about, but now isn't the time. I've been overwhelmed, and I need to clear my head. Can you be patient with me? I promise I'll follow through. It might take months, but it will happen." I smiled. "Of course." She hesitated as if battling something inside, then pulled me into a long hug. "If you get impatient, come by, and I can at least give you more of these," she murmured in my ear. 6 months later, I received an engraved card from Catherine inviting me to the grand opening of the murals at the residence. I was asked to RSVP for drinks, dinner, and dessert, and to dress semi-formally. Intrigued, I RSV'd. Was she making a social occasion out of my murals? Over the past 6 months, I had worked well, completing surprise commissions for wealthy residences in Sydney that paid handsomely. Each time I was asked to create something surprising that reflected the homeowners' personalities. I had generally played it safe, but felt more confident with riskier themes now. Still, I didn't think I had gained any fame that would warrant a crowd. When I arrived on time, I noticed there were no other cars parked on the street. However, the house was brightly lit, with fairy lights illuminating the path to the entrance. I knocked on the door, curious. Catherine opened it, wearing a red evening dress that reminded me of our first meeting. "Matthew," she exclaimed, hugging me and kissing me on the lips. "Right on time. I seem to be the first one here." She stepped back with a smile. "There is no one else. Come to the study for drinks before the main course." In the study, 2 glasses of champagne awaited us. She had arranged a 2-seater couch in front of the mural, and we sat together as she updated me on the past 6 months. The business transition had gone well. She now had a thriving security and events company, with most of Joe's former staff retraining in their new roles. I had to let some people go at first, and a couple couldn't keep it together, but I'm very pleased. Plus, the crime squad is leaving me alone. After our drinks, she led me into her bedroom, where another two-seater was set up facing a second mural. She excused herself briefly and returned with a beautifully prepared chicken mignon, roasted vegetables, and a glass of Australian Riesling. We sat side by side, our legs touching, enjoying a comfortable silence as we ate. After finishing, she leaned back with a sigh, snuggled up to me, and began to speak. I don't know if you realize how important this mural was and your role in it. You took a big risk with Joe and Bruno, turning this painting from an act of control into something else. I replied, if you hadn't taken ownership of it, things would have ended very differently. Plus, you're a fantastic model. If you weren't a successful businesswoman, I'd be begging you to pose for me more often. She smiled. Who says I won't pose for you again? She stood up and moved the table aside, ignoring my offer to help, then turned to face away from me. Zip, please, Matthew, and you may touch. She glanced back at me. It's still your move, Matthew. She stood up, wrapped her arms around me, and kissed me passionately. Looking back with a smile, she said, we're going to the pool room now for dessert. I followed her down the hallway, captivated. In the pool room, a two-seater faced the mural with a small table in front. She excused herself, returning a moment later with delicate crystal bowls of dark chocolate mousse topped with raspberries and cream. We sat close together, feeding each other the dessert slowly. My paintbrush remained on the shelf beside the triangle in chalk. Carefully breaking away from Catherine, I retrieved it. Close your eyes, Catherine, I instructed. She smiled and complied. Instead of tickling her with my fingers, I used the fine sable brush for the lightest touches. I started at her forehead, glided across her eyelids, and circled her mouth. Catherine gasped silently. Her eyes opened, and she quickly grabbed my brush to stop the teasing, sitting rigid as waves of pleasure washed over her. Once her shudders faded, she motioned for me to sit again. I don't have any protection. I should have thought of that, but I assumed this was a public event. She chuckled. Tonight, I'm happy to take the risk, Matthew. You can come inside me, but there's no rush. She leaned in for a kiss, and we gently explored each other. Eventually, she got off me and faced the mural. We looked at it together, rocking back and forth as we slowly built our intensity. The mural depicted a player's perspective taking a shot, with the cue lined up on the white ball. In the background, blurred faces watched, while blue, pink, and black balls were positioned behind the white ball, the final shots of the frame. As Catherine pointed out, the balls were arranged so a well-placed shot could sink all three into different pockets, but that would be a foul in snooker. More eye-catching than the balls were the hands holding the cue, dominating the foreground. They were pale and elegant, with faint lines suggesting old scars, yet still youthful with smooth skin and beautifully shaped apple-red nails. On her left hand were an engagement ring and a wedding band that fit a bit loosely. The real Catherine no longer wore her rings, perhaps symbolizing the cost of that foul shot. A perfect, legal shot might have meant she was free from Bruno's pursuit, with Joe begging for forgiveness and both Bruno and Laura out of the picture for good. But sometimes, you only get one imperfect shot, and you take it, for better or worse. Catherine started to speak again, but paused, leading me back to the bedroom where we cuddled. After a while, she spoke. Matthew, tonight is a thank you, and I owe this to you regardless. But there's more. I've spent 6 months processing everything. I know that if the roles were reversed, Joe wouldn't hesitate to liquidate me and whoever I was with, and Bruno would never stop trying to control me. Given the circumstances, I see no other choice. I'm very sorry Laura was eliminated. Women often have little power in these situations. Still, I can't say I regret acting to protect my life and happiness, despite the profound consequences. She paused and looked me in the eye. That said, I can't stay here and ignore the blood on the floor. I'm selling the business and this house, moving back to Sydney to start fresh. I know it's a lot to ask, but would you consider coming with me? I took a moment to process everything before kissing her and whispering, yes. She looked stunned. I thought you'd say no, demand your share of the business, or complain about being with someone who's been through so much. I only want the chance to paint you again. Anything else is an unearned gift. She pulled me into a long embrace and then chuckled softly. What's on your mind? I asked. I don't want to cover the murals. We can leave that art and truth on the walls. If they figure out the story, good for them. I want to respect your work, but I'd love to see the real estate agents show people this bedroom. Maybe I could paint some fig leaves, I suggested. No, leave it as it is, she giggled. It is what it is. Maybe in 50 years I'll come back with sagging bosoms and wrinkles and ask if they want to update the mural. I'm planning to paint you many more times before then, Catherine. You can tell the real estate agent that my paintings of you will be famous, and only a fool would cover the very first one. She laughed again, and we fell into each other once more.